Wind howling softly, sound of distant camera shutters clicking, soft melancholic music fades in. There is a place in Mumbai where dreams are born, and where they die quietly. Behind the golden lights, beyond the red carpets and movie posters, lies a world built not on art, but on control, a machinery that feeds on ambition, money, and illusion. Bollywood. For over a century it has been the beating heart of Indian cinema, the factory of hope, glamour, and stardom. But beneath the shimmering surface, something darker has been breathing for decades. It begins not with an actor, not with a director, but with power. And in Bollywood, power doesn't belong to those who face the camera. It belongs to those who control what the camera sees. Fade in crowd-cheering flashes of paparazzi lights. This is the story of how a handful of production houses, Yash Raj Films, Dharma Productions, T-Series, Balaji Telefilms, Red Chillies Entertainment, slowly captured Bollywood like emperors ruling over kingdoms. Each one started with a dream, a family, a man trying to make something beautiful. But as the money grew, so did the hunger to own not just the screens, but the souls of those who dreamed of being on them. Soft instrumental builds. Let's start at the end, the illusion's breaking point. A young actor, isolated in his apartment, surrounded by trophies that once defined him, scrolling through headlines that now mock his name. His phone doesn't ring anymore. The same production house that once promised him 3 films in a row has dropped him overnight. The same directors who called him the next superstar now pretend not to know him. The media turns his silence into a scandal. The audience, once his army, now calls him forgotten. This is the unseen side of Bollywood, where dreams are currency and loyalty is disposable. Wind intensifies briefly. But how did we get here? How did cinema, once a storyteller's temple, become an industry run by invisible hands, contracts, nepotism, manipulation, and control? To understand that, we must go back. Film reel sound playing backwards, rewind effect, the origins of power. It was the 1970s, the era of rebellion and revolution. Indian cinema was changing. Amitabh Bachchan had become the voice of the angry young man. Audiences wanted realism, grit, and heroes who could challenge the system. But in the offices of filmmakers like Yash Chopra, another kind of vision was taking shape. One wrapped in romance, beauty, and fantasy. Yash Raj Films, founded in 1970, became the dream factory of the middle class, and with that, the first empire of control was born. They didn't just make movies, they created stars. From Shah Rukh Khan to Kajol, from Rani Mukherjee to Ranveer Singh, YRF turned ordinary actors into gods of cinema. But that transformation came at a price. To become their creation meant surrendering your identity, your choices, to the system that made you. Behind every hit film, there were contracts. Behind every newcomer's rise, there were clauses and conditions that defined their fate. Pen scribbling sound. Yash Raj introduced multi-film contracts long before they became the norm. Actors were signed not just for one film, but for several, binding them exclusively to the studio. Their image, their roles, even their interviews were controlled. On the surface, it seemed professional. But deep down, it was the first brick in a wall that separated the insiders from the outsiders. And soon, others followed. Karan Johar's Dharma Productions, glittering, elite, urban, became the gateway to fame for the children of stars. A launchpad where legacies were extended, not created. Ekta Kapoor's Balaji Telefilms transformed television into a gold mine, and later into film dominance. Bhushan Kumar's T-Series turned music into a weapon. Whoever controlled the songs, controlled the soul of the movie. And Shah Rukh Khan's Red Chillies built empires not just in acting, but in production, VFX, and distribution. A complete ecosystem. Each one ruled a different aspect of the industry, but together they built an invisible syndicate, a hierarchy where access was everything. The new order. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Bollywood had entered its golden age of corporatization. Box office numbers became the new religion. Film releases were no longer art, they were events. And in this era, the true rulers emerged. Not the actors, not the directors, but the production houses who decided whose story was worth telling. They formed alliances with distributors, multiplex chains, and media outlets. Trailers were strategically released. PR teams were hired to shape narratives, and award shows became showcases for their chosen stars. Applause fades in and out. But the darker truth lay in what wasn't seen. Scripts that were rejected not because they lacked quality, but because they didn't fit the brand. Talented outsiders who were never invited to auditions. Films buried before release because they threatened another studio's project. Control wasn't just about money. It was about narrative dominance. Who gets to be the hero? Who gets to fall in love? Who gets to fail? Every choice shaped the public's perception, and therefore, the industry's future. The illusion of freedom. For the actors, it was a beautiful prison. They were praised, adored, and showered with luxury. But every contract came with invisible chains. Say no to one big studio, and 3 others would suddenly stop calling. Speak against the system, and your controversy would mysteriously trend on social media. Choose to work with a smaller filmmaker, and your project might lose music rights, distribution, or funding overnight. The dream had become a trap. Whispers of a crowd fading into silence. Behind the lights, anxiety grew like an unspoken epidemic. Actors who once smiled for cameras cried in the dark, uncertain if their next film would ever happen. Directors compromised their scripts to please corporate panels, and journalists who tried to speak the truth found their access quietly revoked. The audience saw glamour, the insiders saw control, and somewhere, the line between cinema and politics blurred completely. Low hum of an old projector starting, soft flicker of light, distant echoes of applause fading into silence. They called it the golden age of Indian cinema. But golden for whom? The 2000s brought money, corporatization, and a new language of power. Suddenly, every studio had investors, contracts, and marketing departments. Bollywood was no longer about storytelling. It was about scaling. A film wasn't a work of art anymore. It was a product. And the ones who controlled production controlled the pipeline. They were no longer filmmakers. They were gatekeepers. Soft typewriter sounds, flipping of papers. In those air-conditioned glass towers of Mumbai, far from the sweat and chaos of film sets, men and women in branded suits began deciding who would rise and who would fall. Every major production house, Yash Raj, Dharma, Red Chillies, T-Series, built invisible empires of influence. They owned studios. They owned PR agencies. They owned talent management firms. They even owned the distribution networks that decided how many screens a film would get. It wasn't just filmmaking, it was empire building. The web of control. Imagine a spider's web stretched across the entire city. At its center sat the production houses, each thread connected to another. Actors, music labels, media houses, event organizers, award ceremonies, and television networks. Nothing moved without their blessing. An actor signed to one of their talent agencies couldn't promote another studio's film. A journalist who questioned a top producer could find their publication mysteriously excluded from the next red carpet event. A music composer who refused to sell rights cheaply found his tracks replaced by someone more cooperative. Soft, tense strings fade in. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was business, executed with precision. The goal wasn't to destroy outsiders. It was to make them irrelevant. When you control casting calls, music rights, theater access, and media narratives, you don't need to silence anyone. You simply make sure their voice isn't heard. The power of music, the heart of Bollywood, became one of the industry's most powerful tools of control. When T-Series began to dominate the soundtrack business, they understood something others didn't. Songs were not just promotional tools, they were emotional hooks. Every major film needed a chart-topping track to survive, and those tracks were owned, distributed, and licensed by T-Series. If a small independent film tried to compete, it couldn't afford the marketing muscle of a T-Series soundtrack. Its songs wouldn't get airplay, its videos wouldn't trend. Bhushan Kumar didn't just build a music label, he built the rhythm of Bollywood's power structure. One decision in his office could decide whether a song became an anthem or disappeared into silence. Muffled crowd chanting a hit song fades, then abruptly cuts. The melody became Monopoly, the gatekeepers of stardom. Then came the casting revolution, or what the industry called professionalization. Talent agencies like YRF Talent, Dharma Cornerstone, and others began managing every detail of an actor's career, from brand endorsements to scripts, from social media to image control. But in reality, these agencies acted like filters. A script first went to them, and if it didn't align with the studio's image, it was buried before the actor even saw it. If you weren't signed with one of the big 5 agencies, your chance of landing a major film shrank to almost zero. It wasn't about merit, it was about proximity, who you knew, not what you could do. And the most dangerous part? They controlled narratives. If a star failed, their PR team spun the story. Experimental film, ahead of its time, misunderstood genius. If an outsider failed, the same ecosystem branded them difficult, inconsistent, or one-hit wonder. Reputation wasn't organic anymore, it was manufactured. The manipulation of the media, soft clicking of cameras, overlapping reporter voices. By the late 2010s, the relationship between Bollywood and the media had turned symbiotic and toxic. Entertainment journalism became PR. Headlines became marketing campaigns disguised as news. Paparazzi were tipped off in advance to leaked airport looks. Fake controversies were planted before a movie release to generate buzz. And the same journalists who wrote glowing profiles of producers were rewarded with exclusive access and brand collaborations. Truth had been replaced by narrative, and the narrative belonged to those who owned the screens. Nepotism as a business model. Then came the open secret. Nepotism. It wasn't about family pride, it was an economic model. Star kids guaranteed pre-release buzz. They came with built-in fan bases, magazine covers, and social media followings. For producers, that meant safer investments, lower risk, higher visibility. Talent was secondary. Marketability was everything. Every new Star Kid launch wasn't just about cinema, it was about control. By keeping stardom within their own networks, production houses could ensure loyalty, predictability, and brand alignment. Those who tried to question it were drowned out in laughter, memes, or silence. After all, in Bollywood, rebellion doesn't end careers, it erases them. The outsiders struggle. Some tried to fight back. Directors from small towns, actors with no surnames, writers with stories that didn't fit the formula. They created raw, powerful cinema, but their films often disappeared in the shadow of glossy blockbusters. Even when audiences loved them, distribution chains and PR systems buried their reach. Streaming platforms gave a ray of hope, but soon, even those began signing deals with the same big banners. The gatekeepers had learned how to evolve. Static buzz fading into silence. For every breakthrough film by an outsider, there were 10 projects quietly canceled, contracts terminated, funding pulled, or release dates sabotaged. Bollywood wasn't an industry anymore. It was a monarchy, with dynasties ruling unchallenged. The price of control. But control has a cost. When power becomes too concentrated, creativity dies. Audiences began noticing the repetition. Same faces, same stories, same endings. The magic of Bollywood started to fade. Box office numbers dipped. Regional cinema and streaming platforms began to steal the spotlight. The kings of the industry realized they were losing their people, and for the first time, fear crept into the marble halls of power. Wind blowing softly, distant city noises. Behind closed doors, strategies changed. Producers began reaching out to new voices, signing diverse actors, and rebranding their image as inclusive. But many saw through it. The gestures were cosmetic. The system remained untouched. Still, the illusion had to be maintained. The empire could not appear weak. Because in Bollywood, the perception of power is power. The silent war. By the late 2010s, Bollywood was divided, not officially, but in spirit. There were those who protected the old order, and those who challenged it quietly from the shadows. Social media became the new battleground. Fans, journalists, and critics began questioning the structure. Hashtags replaced gossip columns, and truths once whispered in private were shouted across the internet. The curtain was lifting, slowly, painfully, but behind every revelation, there were consequences. Actors lost roles, journalists lost access, filmmakers lost funding. Soft thunder. The war wasn't being fought in the open. It was being fought in silence, in contracts, in calls that never came. And in that silence, another story was forming. One that would shake the very foundation of Bollywood's power. A story of betrayal. Of one insider who dared to break the chain. Soft suspense music rises. He had everything, fame, power, and access to the biggest studios. But he also had guilt. He had seen what the system did to those who didn't obey, and he was about to expose it all. Soft hum of a projector turning on. Distant echoes of applause fade into an eerie silence. Every kingdom falls, but not from an enemy outside. It falls from betrayal within. In Bollywood's golden corridors, where power flowed like champagne and dreams sparkled brighter than diamonds, an insider began to question everything. He wasn't an outsider struggling to survive, and he was one of them. Respected, adored, part of the system. Until one day, he decided to tell the truth. Slow heartbeat, camera shutter sounds. Let's call him Arman Verma. A fictional name, but a reflection of countless real stories. He was one of Bollywood's brightest. Launched by a top production house, shaped by years of studio training, and molded into a star who fit the industry's perfect formula. Charming, loyal, and obedient. For years he played the game, smiled when told to, spoke lines written not by writers but by PR managers. He attended award shows knowing the results were decided long before the night began. He was a puppet, but a successful one. Until one night, everything changed. The night of realization. Soft rain tapping on glass. It was an award show in Mumbai, one of the biggest of the year. Arman had been nominated for Best Actor. Everyone expected him to win. But when the envelope opened, the award went to someone else, the son of a powerful producer. Applause echoed, camera flashes blinded, and in that moment, Arman smiled politely. But inside something cracked. He knew. He had always known. But that night, he felt it. The game wasn't rigged by chance. It was designed that way. Talent didn't matter. Loyalty didn't matter. Only obedience did. After the show, as the parties continued, Arman sat alone in his car, staring at the golden skyline. He had everything, fame, fortune, fans, but suddenly, it all felt hollow. What was the price of this illusion? How many like him were trapped in this silent cage? That night, he decided to find out. Pulling the curtain. The deeper he looked, the darker it got. Scripts were being traded like commodities. Studios bought reviews. Casting decisions were influenced not by talent, but by favors and networks. He discovered secret meetings where producers discussed not films, but alliances. Which star would pair with which director? Which rival studio's release date would be sabotaged? Which journalist needed handling? Arman began collecting evidence, contracts, emails, recordings. He knew it was dangerous. He knew they were watching, but truth once awakened refuses to go back to sleep. He planned to expose everything, not through gossip or interviews, but through a documentary. A real, raw, unfiltered mirror of Bollywood's soul. Static crackle, low hum of tension building. He contacted a few trusted journalists, independent, fearless voices who had once been silenced by the same system. Together, they began building a timeline, how the same handful of production houses had controlled not just films but culture itself. Every hero we adored, every song we hummed, every story we cried for, all chosen, packaged, and sold by the same machine. It wasn't Bollywood anymore. It was a narrative empire. The backlash. But the empire watches everything, And when a soldier turns against the king, the retaliation is swift. First came the silence. Phone calls unanswered. Projects postponed. Brands quietly dropping him. Then came the whispers. Stories planted in tabloids calling him unstable, arrogant, ungrateful. His old friends vanished overnight. Producers who once promised loyalty began avoiding his name in meetings. Soft murmur of distant chatter fading into whispers. Bollywood doesn't destroy people publicly. It lets them fade away. But Arman refused to fade. He released snippets, fragments of truth, voice notes, leaked emails, anonymous testimonials from crew members and assistants who had seen the dark side of the dream factory. And for the first time, audiences began to see the cracks clearly. Social media exploded. Fans demanded answers. The word monopoly started trending, and suddenly, the kings of Bollywood were afraid. The counterattack. Then came the counterattack, swift, precise, and brutal. An orchestrated PR storm, fake scandals, edited videos, false accusations. The same journalists who once praised him now called him a traitor. TV debates mocked him. Even fellow actors posted cryptic messages hinting that he had lost touch with reality. Behind the scenes, lawyers sent notices. Projects he had signed were terminated. Streaming platforms backed out of his documentary deal. And the same producers who had built his career were now dismantling it piece by piece. Slow, heavy heartbeat. It wasn't just a battle for truth anymore. It was a war for survival. The loneliness of rebellion. Fame is a crowd. Truth is isolation. As the days passed, Arman found himself alone. No friends, no calls, no offers. The city that once cheered his name now ignored him. The same magazines that printed his face on every cover now ran stories calling him difficult to work with. But somewhere in that silence he found peace. For the first time, he didn't have to pretend. He had lost everything, but he had gained something priceless. Clarity. He saw Bollywood for what it truly was, a grand illusion powered by human ambition. And then, just as quietly as he had risen, he disappeared. No interviews, no statements, no goodbye. Just gone. The ripples of his rebellion. But truth doesn't die with its messenger. His disappearance became a question that wouldn't fade. Fans speculated, journalists searched, filmmakers whispered his name in private, and slowly, new voices began to rise. Small creators, independent directors, and young actors who had once been afraid to speak, now started talking. The rebellion Arman began had no leader, no flag, no slogan. It was just truth spreading through silence. Streaming platforms began promoting smaller films. Audiences began rejecting overhyped blockbusters. And Bollywood, for the first time in decades, began to tremble. Soft rumble of thunder. Every empire is built on fear. But when the people stop fearing the kings, the empire begins to fall. The consequences. Months later, one of the journalists who had worked with Arman received an anonymous package. Inside, a hard drive, unlabeled, encrypted. When they opened it, they found hundreds of files, contracts, emails, call recordings, enough to expose the system completely. But before they could publish it, their website went offline, their servers were attacked, and the files disappeared. Officially, nothing happened. Unofficially, the empire had won again. Long pause, faint hum of a broken tape recorder. But somewhere, in a quiet corner of the internet, fragments of that data still exist. Whispers of the truth hidden in plain sight. And even though Arman was gone, his shadow lingered over every film, every interview, every smile in Bollywood. Because everyone knew, one wrong move, one honest word, and the illusion could collapse again. Wind blowing through an empty corridor. Bollywood had survived the rebellion, but it had been scarred forever. The kings had silenced one man, but they couldn't silence the idea he left behind. And soon that idea would return, louder than ever. Soft heartbeat slowly fades into darkness. Soft, distant echoes of applause fade into static. A single piano note repeats, slowly fading into darkness. For years, Bollywood had been a kingdom of kings, untouchable, unbreakable, and unquestioned. But no empire lasts forever, and the downfall never begins with thunder. It begins in whispers. Soft city ambience, honking, rain, chatter, fading into silence. At first, no one noticed the shift. The red carpet still glittered. The premieres still drew crowds, the same faces still smiled from magazine covers. But underneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. Trust. Audiences were waking up. They had seen too much. Too many repetitive stories, too many rigged awards, too many arrogant interviews. The magic was fading. The breaking of faith Bollywood was built on emotion, on the promise that when the lights dimmed, the audience could believe. But when belief dies, nothing can save the illusion. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, something strange began happening. Films that once guaranteed success, massive multi-stars, big-budget spectacles, nepotism-driven projects, started failing. And the ones that succeeded were different. Raw, real, unpolished. Stories made by outsiders, by storytellers who had once been ignored. The monopoly was breaking, not from outside forces but from inside fatigue. Audiences were tired of being told what to love. They wanted to feel again. And that desire was something no marketing budget could manufacture. Soft rumble of thunder. One by one, the emperors of Bollywood faced their reckoning. The fall of giants. A high-profile studio film, 3 superstar kids, a celebrated director, a massive budget, released with fanfare. But within days, it collapsed at the box office. The audience rejected it outright. Memes flooded social media. Reviewers tore it apart. And for the first time, producers couldn't control the narrative. The internet had become the new censor board, and it was ruthless. Every fake smile, every scripted interview, every self-congratulatory award clip, dissected, mocked, exposed. The curtain of glamour had been ripped open, and behind it the public saw what had been hidden for decades. The machinery, the manipulation, the illusion of choice. The kings had lost their subjects. The rise of the new wave. As the old empire stumbled, a new one was quietly rising. Independent filmmakers, regional cinema, digital storytellers. They didn't have the budgets or the influence, but they had authenticity. Films from the South, from small towns, from unknown directors, began capturing the national imagination. Audiences who once worshipped Bollywood now looked elsewhere for truth. Streaming platforms amplified this revolution. They didn't need theaters. They didn't need approval from the big banners. They needed only one thing: stories that felt real. And suddenly, the power dynamic flipped. The same stars who once refused to work outside major studios were now begging for digital relevance. The same producers who once mocked online creators were now offering them deals. Bollywood was no longer the empire. It had become one of many players in a larger, freer cinematic world. Soft piano note rises with faint hope. For the first time in decades, art was breathing again. The industry fights back. But power never surrenders quietly. The old guard wasn't done. They regrouped, holding meetings in glass towers, crafting strategies to reclaim dominance. If the audience wouldn't come to their theaters, they would control the platforms. Production houses began investing in streaming companies, creating partnerships, demanding control over algorithms, thumbnails, and recommendations. Even online, the gatekeeping returned, hidden under data and branding. Actors were instructed to reinvent their image, to look humble, to sound authentic, to appear relatable. It was rebranding, not reform. They didn't understand that what people wanted wasn't relatability, it was honesty. And honesty can't be faked. The exposure, soft static crackle, then a faint keyboard tapping sound. Then came the leaks. An anonymous page began posting internal emails, chats, and deals, exposing how studios manipulated media ratings, paid influencers, and planted online reviews. The evidence was undeniable. For the first time, the illusion was backed by proof. Fans who had once fought wars online defending their favorite stars began turning against them. They realized that what they thought was fandom was, in fact, marketing. Bollywood's credibility was shattering, not because of one scandal, but because of pattern fatigue. Year after year, lie after lie, the trust had eroded beyond repair. And in an industry built entirely on trust, that was the beginning of the end. The media's reckoning. The entertainment media, once the loyal mouthpiece of production houses, also faced a storm. Viewers no longer believed their headlines. Journalists who had once been bribed with access now found themselves mocked by the very audiences they had misled. Independent journalists, YouTubers, and analysts began taking over, offering unfiltered takes that resonated more with the public than glossy interviews ever did. Bollywood's PR war was failing, because in the digital age, truth travels faster than narrative. Wind howling through open studio doors. The collapse of the old system. The more the old system tried to control, the faster it collapsed. Big stars began losing money. Production houses downsized. The once unreachable big banners now competed for survival. Even the kings who had once ruled with absolute authority began to feel the walls closing in. Some tried to adapt. Some withdrew quietly. And a few tried to escape the blame entirely, reinventing themselves as mentors, reformers, and advocates of change. But audiences had changed too. They could see through the facade. They no longer followed faces. They followed stories. And that shift was irreversible. And the turning point. It all came to a head one night, a major award ceremony, broadcast live. The host cracked a joke about nepotism. The crowd laughed awkwardly. A few stars forced smiles. Others looked away. Then a young actor, a newcomer, raw, fearless, took the stage to receive a small award. He looked around at the glittering audience and said something that silenced the hall. "You don't need to open doors for us anymore. We built our own." Stunned silence, faint heartbeat sound. The crowd froze. No applause, no music, just truth, hanging heavy in the air. That clip went viral, and overnight it became the symbol of a new era. The empire had finally fallen, not with an explosion but with a whisper of defiance. The aftermath, soft piano returns, melancholic. The years that followed were quiet. Bollywood still existed, still made films, still celebrated itself. But the blind worship was gone. The illusion of invincibility was gone. The kings had become businessmen. The dream factory had become an industry like any other. And somewhere in the midst of it all, new voices began shaping the future, smaller, bolder, truer. Cinema was no longer about dominance, it was about diversity, and that was something no empire could ever control. Soft wind fades in, gentle optimism builds. For every gatekeeper who fell, 10 new creators rose. For every suppressed truth, a new platform emerged. And in that quiet evolution, Bollywood began to rediscover what it had lost long ago, its soul. But deep within those old studios, behind locked glass doors and silent boardrooms, a question still lingers. Low hum of a projector starting, faint flicker of light against darkness. The screen lights up. Faces appear. The crowd laughs, cries, claps. But for the first time, they know. They know it's all a show. Soft echo of film reel turning, the empire of Bollywood, once worshipped, once feared, now stands at a crossroads. Not destroyed, not dead, but stripped bare. The lights still shine, but they no longer blind. The songs still play, but they no longer control. And somewhere in that silence between applause and truth lies the final revelation. The anatomy of illusion. Every empire is built on a story, and Bollywood's story was simple. Dreams, heroes, love, victory. But behind that dream was a darker structure, one designed to feed on human desire. Production houses had learned long ago that controlling cinema wasn't about controlling money. It was about controlling emotion. The emotions of millions. Every blockbuster, every headline, every feud, every leaked rumor, it was all part of a psychological machine that sold hope, The star wasn't just an actor. They were an idea that said, if you follow me, you can escape your pain. But ideas are fragile. Once people see the strings, the magic dies. Soft wind through an empty cinema hall. The illusion began with good intentions, to entertain, to dream, to make people feel. But as the decades passed, power replaced purpose. It was no longer about stories. It was about ownership, control, and legacy. The same dream that built Bollywood had now become its prison. The human cost. Fame is a currency, but it's not free. And behind every spotlight, someone pays the price. The newcomers who lost themselves trying to fit in, the artists who compromised their vision to survive, the fans who worshipped false idols. The system didn't destroy them overnight. It seduced them slowly, beautifully, completely. It whispered, "Stay silent and you'll shine. Follow us and you'll never fall." But silence kills art, and blind following kills truth. Heartbeats sound slow and steady. One by one, the dreamers began to fade. Some broke down quietly. Others vanished entirely, erased by the same system that once celebrated them. Because in the empire of illusion, memory is selective. It remembers only what it can profit from. And the mirror turns. But history has a strange way of correcting itself. When an empire becomes too heavy with lies, it collapses under its own weight. And when it collapses, something powerful happens. The mirror turns. The same industry that once sold fantasy is now forced to sell truth. The same stars who once lived untouchable lives are now forced to look human. The same audience that once believed everything is now the judge. Soft piano builds, hopeful yet heavy. Bollywood didn't vanish. It transformed. The new generation doesn't bow to legacy. They question it. They make films about truth, not perfection. They show wounds, not filters. And maybe that's what cinema was always meant to be. A reflection, not an illusion. The eternal cycle. But the question still lingers in the air like smoke after fireworks. Can the system ever really change? Or does it simply learn to disguise itself better? Every decade, the illusion rebrands itself, and new faces, new words, same game. What was once nepotism becomes family business. What was once manipulation becomes marketing. What was once control becomes vision. The stage changes, the faces change, but the script remains the same. Because the hunger for power, the need to be worshipped, never dies. It only finds new forms. And so, even as new filmmakers rise, as truth-tellers take the stage, the old ghosts linger in the wings, watching, waiting, planning their comeback. The empire never truly dies. It only hides until the next illusion begins. The final frame. Projector slows down, reel clicking softly. Faint echo of an old Bollywood song playing in the distance. The camera pans over the empty seats of a once grand theater. Dust floats in the projector beam. The posters on the walls fade with time, and in that silence, you can still hear it. The echoes of 1,000 dreams, both real and fabricated. Because for all its flaws, all its lies, Bollywood gave the world something priceless, an emotion. Even if it was built on illusion, it made people feel. And sometimes that feeling is worth everything. Soft piano returns, melancholic, warm. In the end, the story of Bollywood isn't about villains or heroes. It's about human desire, to be loved, to be remembered, to belong. The studios built empires, the stars built legacies, the audience built dreams, and when those dreams collided, the illusion was born. So maybe the truth isn't that production houses control Bollywood. Maybe the truth is, we all do. Because as long as we crave the illusion, someone will always sell it. Wind fades, projector stops. Black screen, silence, final reflection, closing voiceover. In a world where fame is the new god and truth the new rebellion, cinema remains our mirror. Sometimes it shows who we are. Sometimes it shows what we want to be. But the day it stops reflecting truth is the day the illusion wins again. Soft fade out. Distant applause echoing in an empty hall.